To Be an Adventurer, authored by Gail Vaughn, narrated by Gail Vaughn. Chapter 3, Outside of the City. Rota took his first steps into the unknown. The contrast between the city and the forest was evident. The forest and the city were not separated by anything. It was like an imaginary line, like a portal, where one side is a bright, busy metropolis with a million different things and colors all fighting for your attention, and the other side was a dingy, dark forest with seemingly nothing of importance going on. The imaginary line split the path he was walking on. The nice cobbled road he walked on turned to dirt. All of this felt weird to Rota. The shade of the overhanging trees gave the forest an eerie feeling. Still, Rota walked on. After walking around for a while, he realized how truly unprepared he was. He had no equipment, no tools, and no skills. One thing that he did have, though, was an education. Not a good one, but one that should hopefully suffice. He realized that the only thing he had to eat this morning was a piece of bread. He decided to look for berries. He looked for what felt like, and probably was, many hours. He didn't struggle to find plants, or berries, just ones that he recognized and trusted. Eventually, he did find something. It was a small patch of berries native to the Forsaken realm of the Lare kingdom. Unfortunately, he found them second. They were being guarded by a Veek, a large rodent the size of a baby deer. The Veek have large teeth and claws. They are fat creatures with small heads. Their eyes, though seemingly far apart, give them excellent field of view. They are seen as a sign of bad luck in Lare, especially for unsuspecting adventurers. It is said that a Veek could tear a human to shreds within 12 seconds of sinking their teeth into them. They also love berries. Rota knew how dangerous the Veek could be, and decided that he would slowly back away and not cause conflict. It was too late. The Veek had already seen him. The Veek lunged at Rota. Rota turned around and ran as quickly as possible. Rota then remembered something that he'd learnt while still at school. The Veek are fast, much faster than most humans. Realizing that he will not be able to outrun the animal, Rota leapt behind a large tree for cover. Rota then looked around on the ground for something that he could use. His eyes scanned frantically for something. He knew that he only had a second before the Veek would be there. He saw a tree branch. It wasn't too heavy. It was actually very frail looking. He didn't have any more time. He grabbed the stick and turned to face the Veek. The Veek was standing there, with its pounce prepared. It lunged at Rota once more. Rota swung the branch with all his might. He hit the Veek in midair as the stick snapped upon impact. He looked into the creature's eyes for the first time. They were primal, full of hatred. The look the animal gave him paralyzed Rota in fear. Rota couldn't move an inch. The Veek began to get back up, maintaining his eye contact with Rota. Rota knew that the animal getting back up was a terrible idea, and that the Veek could easily maul him. Rota was then forced to make a decision, face the beast or be killed by it. His mind was racing, trying to get his body to move. Eventually, Rota bit the inside of his cheek and ran towards the Veek. He kicked the beast's head into the large tree beside him. He then ran, faster than he ever knew he could. He didn't look back, scared that the Veek would still be behind him. He grabbed a couple of berries from the bush and ran away, hoping that he would be able to lose the Veek. Rota ran and ran. He didn't even once look back. Only once his heart felt that it was about to explode and his lungs were too weak to get air did Rota collapse to the ground. He looked behind him. There was nothing. Nothing at all was chasing him. He was safe, though his chest didn't feel the same way. Rota took a second to calm down, remembering something that his father had told him. Make sure you are breathing, not because adventurers often forget, but because you can't make a half-decent decision while winded. After his encounter with the Veek, Rota had a newfound respect for Moltoka. He missed him, and his silly humor that only someone who had never heard a joke before would find funny. Once Rota's breathing was finally regulated, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the berries that he had grabbed from the bush earlier. Rota decided that it was time for a break. He sat down under a shaded tree and began to eat the berries. Even after eating the berries, Rota still sat there, entranced by the beauty of everything. The forest was peaceful, at least whenever a Veek wasn't around. The serenity of the wilderness took Rota away as his tired body fell asleep. Rota awoke several hours later. He stood up and took a deep breath. He looked upwards to see where the sun was, but the trees were blocking his sight. Realizing that he had no idea what time it was, and that he might have just slept most of the day away, he began walking again, hoping that he would make it to the next town before sunset. Rota was very upset when it began to get dark only a couple of minutes later. A couple of hours later, Rota was tired, but he could finally see the light of the town on the path ahead of him. As he had this thought, he heard a noise. It was a shuffling noise on the gravel behind him, like someone was following him. The footsteps were louder and faster than Rota's. He turned around and froze. His nerves were still on edge from his encounter with the Vik earlier that day. He saw in the distance 2 floating green orbs. They were rapidly approaching. Rota, again paralyzed with fear, stood there unsure of what to do. The orbs grew larger as they got closer. Rota realized what they were. They were eyes. Eyes that were not at all dissimilar to a Vik's. Rota ran. He had no time to think. Rota knew that he could have died to the Vik he saw this morning. Whatever was following him now was certainly more than a dozen times larger. Rota ran into the town. Once he had made it a safe distance, he looked behind him towards the beast. The beast didn't dare walk into the light. It just stayed slightly outside of the realm of visibility. It let out a burdened, heavy, and aspirated groan. The door to a nearby house opened, and out came an old man with a magical item in hand. He pointed it at the monster, and it made a loud bang. Sparks shot out from the barrel of the torch-shaped object. The monster turned and fled. The old man turned towards Rota and yelled, "Boy, get in here!" Rota listened and came inside. Immediately as Rota entered the house, the old man pointed to a chair set at the table. "Sit, boy," the man said. Rota did as he was told. The man looked towards his concerned wife and said, "This is nothing. Let me handle it." He then turned back towards Rota and began questioning him. "You're not from around here. Where are you from? What's your name?" Rota answered his first question immediately. "I am from Purple City." Rota thought for a second about how he no longer wished to be associated with the Harian name. "My name is Rota." "What's your family name? Down south in your so-called noble realm, nearly everyone has one," the man said. He squinted his eyes towards Rota. Rota began to sweat. The old man in front of him clearly wasn't very trusting. Rota did not know what to say. He figured that he wasn't a good liar, so he should just try to be honest. "It's a family matter. I don't really talk to them. I'm not really part of it anymore." The man pressed his lips together. "So, that's why a boy your age would be traveling alone with no protection. You're running away." Rota paused. He had never thought of it that way. Was he running away? Surely not. He has nothing to run away from. The man sighed, breaking the silence that Rota's thoughts had led into the room. "You'll sleep in there." The man pointed to a room located on the wall behind him. "Shiro will make you breakfast in the morning." He pointed to his wife. "We wake at daybreak." Rota was confused at this old man's hospitality. The man hadn't been nice for a second since Rota had met him, but Rota decided to play along, seeing as his only alternative was to sleep outside. He stood up, thanked the man and his wife, and began to walk to his room. The man grabbed him on the shoulder and told him one last thing. "Don't make me regret this, noble." Rota went into his room and laid down on his bed. He wasn't at all tired. He had already slept enough that day. He just laid there, staring at the ceiling. He thought about how this was what his father did every day, how everything that he owned was gained through adventuring. His father would leave town, fight some monster, and hopefully get paid. Rota felt some tears developing in his eyes. He was very close with his father. Even so, he sometimes wished that his father would get better at his job and make some more money. Now he realized exactly how hard being an adventurer truly was, and now he had no clue what tomorrow would bring. To Be an Adventurer, authored by Gail O'Vaughn, narrated by Gail O'Vaughn. Chapter 4, Awkwardness at Breakfast. Rota awoke to the sound of banging on his door. "What part of daybreak don't you understand?" It was the old man from last night. It was bright in Rota's room. It really should have woken him up. He got out of bed and left his room. He took a look around the house. He didn't get a chance to have a good look at it yesterday. It was larger than the apartment that he had grown up in. Every room was more than a handful of feet wide. Something else that he had noticed was the lack of runic written anywhere. It was a small detail, easy to miss, but very important for the way that life worked in the city. There were light runes for illuminating the house at night, water runes for washing and drinking, and fire runes for cooking and staying warm. All of those basic essentials, at least in Rota's mind, were missing. Rota sat down at the table and looked down at the food in front of him. It was nothing special, just some eggs and meat. He ate his food without saying a word. Nobody else at the table did either. Rota was still thinking about how the food was nice and hot, despite obviously not being made with a fire rune. Rota decided to ask, breaking the silence. So, how did you make this? He asked. He looked up to see an appalled look upon the old lady's face. He looked to the old man to see if he held the same sentiment. The old man pressed his lips together.
Why? Is it not any good?
Rota's face went red with embarrassment. No, it's just, I haven't seen any runic in your house. I just don't know how it would be made, that's all. The woman seemed relieved. She then explained to Rota, Runes are very expensive. You need wizards in order for them to work. We don't have any around here. I just lit a fire on the stovetop using a piece of flint. Rota felt silly and sheltered and rude. He had no clue of this other way of living. He looked down at his food and continued to let the silence in the room simmer. After a while, it became awkward and everyone could feel it. The old man decided to speak up.
So, how old are you?
16, sir, Rota replied.
I don't reckon you have a job since you ran away from home, do you?
No, sir. Why?
Because I don't usually give a bed and breakfast for free. How much do you have?
2 silver and 10 copper. The old man raised an eyebrow. He obviously didn't believe Rota.
Well, where are you headed?
North. The man looked annoyed at this response.
Towards what?
A friend, Rota replied.
You don't sound so sure. What's your big picture?
Rota paused for a while. He didn't have an answer.
You're telling me that you're adventuring and have nothing. Do you even have a weapon? Do you even have a way to make money?
Rota did not look up. He just stared at the food in front of him. Rota knew the man was right. He truly was good at nothing. He hadn't thought anything through. Maybe he was running away. Not from anyone, but from the thought that he has nothing. No skills, no clothes, and no food. The man let out a heavy, disappointed sigh.
Do you know how to fight?
Rota thought back to his encounter with the Veek yesterday. I guess so. The man thought for a second, and then said,
I'll tell you what. If you can bring me the body of an animal, I won't take your money.
He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. He set it on the table in front of Rota. Rota grabbed hold of it and examined it. The knife was sharp, but something about the blade felt off to Rota. Its edge was straight, but the way the light reflected off of the blade was weird. Maybe someone damaged it while trying to sharpen it. Rota looked at the hilt. It was thick and sturdy, almost too uncomfortable to hold. It had runic written on the hilt. There's runic on this, sir, Rota said. It must be worth too much to give to a stranger.
As we said, there are no wizards around here. It's worth nothing to us. It's not even a good knife.
What was that magical weapon you used last night? The man gave Rota the most dumbfounded expression he could muster.
It's a sparking torch. Don't you use them for celebrations down south?
Rota felt dumb. He decided he would stop talking, as to not make a bigger fool of himself.
Anyways, we've got a pretty bad Veek problem around here, if you'd like to help.
The man chuckled a little.
Or you could try to take out that dang orc. Everybody in town would pitch in for your reward if you did that.
Orc? Rota asked. He had heard about them in some textbooks in school, but they don't live in Lorraine, at least not this part of it.
Yeah, you know, those big pig people, the man choked. That monster that was following you last night. Darn thing ate all the cows from the neighboring town.
Rota didn't know anything about the orcs. All that he knew was that he didn't want to come into contact with one again. Yes, sir. I can help you hunt some Veeks, Rota said.
Finish your breakfast first. Leftover food is seen as disrespectful in this. Commoner's realm, the man warned.
Rota finished eating and set out on his quest to kill and bring back a Veek. He walked straight into the forest with no hesitation. He really needed to pay back the man who let him not have to sleep in the cold. He figured it wouldn't be that hard to find one. He did yesterday, after all. He searched and he searched. It seemed like the animals of the forest were hiding from him, and unlike yesterday, the hot summer's ferocity beamed down upon him. For hours he searched, not seeing a single soul. The hours of the day slipped past him. His confidence had almost completely waned by the late afternoon. But, when all hope seemed lost, he heard a noise. A scurrying in the grass. Rota ran after it, hoping that he could get the drop on the animal. It was indeed a Veek. The peripheral vision allowed for it to see Rota before he could get too close. The Veek ran and Rota pursued. Rota was nowhere near fast enough to keep up with it. Just fast enough to keep sight of it as it entered a large, dark cave. Rota approached the entrance to the cave. He looked in and saw nothing. It was dark. He thought about giving up on the Veek. After all, going into a dark cave wasn't a good idea. The old man's voice echoed in his head. The thoughts of his uselessness pressed into Rota's body with the weight of 1,000 stones. If he had spent the whole day accomplishing nothing, what was he even good for? Rota looked towards the sky. It was nearly sunset. He sighed and walked into the cave, knowing that this was his last chance to make anything of himself. To Be an Adventurer, authored by Galo Vaughn, narrated by Galo Vaughn. Chapter 5. Life's Purpose. The cave was dark, really dark. Rota couldn't even see 3 feet in front of him. He knew that if he couldn't kill this Veek, that the old man would be disappointed, and proven right. Rota felt useless. Maybe adventuring wasn't meant for him. Suddenly, Rota heard a growl. It was a deep, earth-shaking growl. He looked around frantically for the origin of the noise. 2 green orbs appeared from the darkness. It was the orc. "Leave, child," the orc growled. Rota took his knife out and put it between him and the orc. The orc bellowed once more. "Leave!" Rota stood there, terrified. The orc's eyes were just like the Veek's, just larger and scarier. Once again, Rota was paralyzed by fear. The orc stood up. It was several times larger than Rota. It began to slowly approach him. Useless, useless, useless. Why can't I move? I need to run. I need to flee. Why am I still here, facing the largest beast I've ever seen? These thoughts rang in Rota's head. The orc was now at arm's length from Rota. Like in his fight with the Veek, he felt out of options, like there was no correct move, and that everything he could do would kill him. Rota then grit his teeth so hard that he felt as if his jaw might break, and like with the Veek, Rota's body moved. Rota's arm slashed across the orc's chest using the knife. The knife slid across the orc's body, unable to penetrate its leather-like skin. The orc huffed, blowing a huge gust of breath into Rota's face. The orc brought his hand up and smacked Rota in the chest with his palm. The shove echoed throughout Rota's whole body, sending him to the ground. The orc continued to inch closer to Rota. Rota sat up. Realizing that he couldn't beat the monster, he began to question him, hoping that they could find a resolution peacefully. "Who are you? What do you want?" Rota pleaded. The orc stopped, seeing that Rota wanted to handle this peacefully. "Me? Who are you to attack a man in his sleep?" "I wasn't. I followed a Veek that I was hunting into here." The orc paused, just taking a moment to look at Rota. "Why the knife?" Rota thought for a bit. He had no reason to believe that the orc was harmful, other than the horrible things that the man had said, a man who Rota himself didn't even like. The orc took Rota's silence as an answer. "I scared you, didn't I?" The orc then turned around and walked into the shadows. A couple of seconds later, Rota hears the squeal of a Veek. The orc then returns with the Veek's corpse in his hand. He throws it on the ground in front of Rota. "There," the orc says, looking at the floor. Rota looks at the dead animal in front of him. "Thank you. I'm sorry," Rota says. The orc looks Rota in the eyes. He thinks for a second. "Do you need help cooking that?" he asks. Rota thought for a minute. He hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. He figured it would be best to eat the one he has now, instead of taking more of the old man's food. "Yes, sir," Rota replies. The orc thought for a second. Okay then, you go outside and find some wood, while I put on some clothes, the orc commanded. Rota then realized that the orc was wearing nothing but a pair of underwear. Rota did as he is told. He collects the firewood. Rota has no clue what he is doing, and just collects any wood that he finds. The orc eventually exits the cave, fully clothed. Rota throws all of the wood that he collected in front of the orc. The orc takes one look at the pile of wood in front of him, and then looks at Rota. He knows that he did a bad job. The orc shifts through the wood, only using the useful pieces. He then makes a spark with a piece of flint and rock. The wood bursts into flames and illuminates the area. Then he uses some sticks to mount the Vik's corpse above the flame. Rota then sits down. He sits down as far away from the orc as he can without looking prejudiced. Rota is obviously still scared of the orc. The orc notices this. Rota and the orc just sit there. They watch the Vik's corpse cook, never acknowledging each other. It was now awkward. Rota knew that the orc must not like the situation any more than he does. Rota at last looked towards the orc. The fire illuminated his face. For the first time, Rota could actually see what the orc looked like. The orc had olive-colored leather skin. Looking at his face, you could tell that he wasn't old, maybe a young adult. His face, despite the rest of his body being coarse, was actually smooth. It was like looking at another human. Well, everything except for the large, smushed nose and tusks. The orc's resting expression seemed stern. Not malicious, just stern. All of Rota's staring invited the orc to begin conversing. "Never seen an orc before?" he asked. "No, sir," Rota replied. "There aren't any in Luray. Why are you here?" The orc looked at Rota confused. "I'm from Luray. Just the Tikar territory, to the east." "Do you mean the Forsaken Realm?" Rota asked. "No," the orc growled. "That's just what the humans call it." Rota looked down at the floor. "I'm sorry. I had no idea." The orc looks at Rota. He is genuinely just ignorant. The orc looks at Rota's guilt. He feels bad. Rota obviously wasn't intentionally being mean. The orc decides to answer Rota's question. "My name is Rungar. I am an orc from Ata village, located within the Tikar territory." Rungar leans in towards the fire and rotates the Vik around, making sure to not let one side get burnt. "Over the last couple of weeks, our village has been attacked by what's left of the Tikar tribe. They say that they want their land back, that was taken by Luray. I was requested to send a letter to Luray's capital, requesting help from them. We can't take on the Tikar tribe on our own. That has been completed. Now I'm just trying to get back to Ata, to help in protecting my village." Rota has no clue what to say. He just sits there and listens. "What about you? Why are you hunting around here? It's a quiet, peaceful forest. You are lucky to have found a Vik at all." Rota thinks to himself, was the old man lying to me? He thought back to all that he knew about the old man. He wasn't very nice, but he didn't seem to be malicious of any kind towards him. Rungar takes the Vik off of the flame. He splits it in half with his bare hands, and hands half of it to Rota. Rota finally answers Rungar's question. "An old man from the neighboring village told me to hunt here. He also told me that you were dangerous. I'm sorry. I must have misjudged you." "Sounds to me like he wanted you killed. What did you tell him?" "Nothing. He didn't know anything about me." Deep down, Rota knew what it was. He was a nobility. Rota wasn't well off, but he was still the grandson of the legendary Oji Harion. The whole man's whole attitude towards him changed after finding out that he was from noble lands. Rota doesn't understand the significance of his past, but it's for the best that he probably doesn't tell anyone. Rota and Rungar eat their food. Neither of them say anything throughout the meal. Once they are done eating, they continue their conversation. Rungar is the first to say anything. "You don't seem to be from around here, are you?" "No." Rota looks at the ground. He really doesn't want to say anything. He is scared that Rungar won't like that he's from the noble realm. Rungar notices Rota's sheepish behavior around this subject and decides to not comment on it. "Where are you going? What is your story?" Rungar asks. "Story?" "In Tikar culture, your life is like a story. It helps us to build a better future by making our lives in the way that we would wish for them to be told," Rungar explains. "So what's yours?" This made Rota think. Maybe he was living his life all wrong. Where's my story going? Rota thought. Compared to Rungar, who has a whole story to tell ahead of him, Rota has nothing to aspire towards. Rota thought for a little while longer before answering Rungar's question. My father died a couple of days ago. Since then, I've lost my home, and now I have nothing. Rota thought for a second. He pulled out the book his father gave him. This is the last possession I have of my father. It has runic on it. I hope to meet with an old friend of mine and get it to work again. After I get that done, I want to explore the world and see all that there is to see. Rungar was listening. He seemed to be very engaged in the whole story Rota had. Rota thought for a while. Do you think I could maybe come back with you to your village?
What about your friend?
He's just a couple of towns north. I can meet back up with you someplace. Rungar thought for a while. It was awkward when he finally said something.
If they are that close, I can just go with you. Ata is northeast of here, so it's not out of the way.
I can't wait to see your village. Rungar pointed to the cave.
Let's get some sleep. We will leave as soon as we wake up.
Yes, sir, Rota replied. To Be an Adventurer, authored by Gail O'Vaughn, narrated by Gail O'Vaughn. Chapter 6, King June. Tapping is heard coming from the glass door leading to the balcony that overlooks the city. The birds seem to be awake. Maybe I should be too. King June Larray thinks to himself. He leans up and looks into his room. Sure enough, the daylight from the outside world is rushing in through his windows. June gets out of bed and joins the birds on the balcony. He takes a nice, great breath of fresh air. The summer mornings are beautiful in the Larray capital. June overlooks the marvelous city and kingdom that he gets to call his own. He wishes that he could stay there forever, but he knows that he woke up late and must surely get to work. June exits the balcony and opens the doors to his closet. It is huge, almost like a whole other room entirely. Despite the large number of outfits in the room, he already knows what he must wear. Traditional royal attire. He sighs and puts his clothes on. He exits his closet and sits down on his bed. I wonder if anyone will miss me if I just lie down for a couple more minutes, King June thinks. Suddenly, the doors to his room burst open, slamming the doors into the walls beside them. Without looking up, King June exclaims, Ah, Kari. Good morning. He begins to joke. You know you are always welcome in my room at any time. So why must you hurt my poor door hinges? King June finally looks up. Kari is obviously in distress. He is panting and can't seem to get any air. June stood up from his bed. Kari isn't usually like this. In the 13 years that he had known Kari, she was the most calm, level-headed servant of the kingdom he had ever met. Such is why she is the king's main aside, his right hand. Today, something was different. It made June's stomach turn, seeing someone so strong and close to him in this state. Kari, are you all right? He called out. Kari took a few moments to catch her breath. She had obviously ran all the way here. This, she began, still out of breath. This is important. She held out an opened envelope. King June stiffly walks towards her, scared of the danger that the envelope may evoke. He grabs onto it and looks Kari in the eyes. What is this? He asks. It's a letter, she explains. A nice orc fellow gave it to me. He said for me to open it and read it, if that may help it get to you. It is of national significance. Threats of war. King June Larray opens the envelope and finds a sheet of paper folded in half. He unfolds it. It is a handwritten letter. It doesn't have perfect handwriting, but it is far from illegible. King June reads over the letter. Dearest King June Larray, this is a letter coming from the head of Ata village, Magor, located in the Tikar territory. Recently, the chief of the Tikar tribe, Rutel, has been sending armed soldiers into Ata village, hoping to get the good orcs of Larray to join him in reclaiming the Tikarian lands. He believes the land to belong to him, and that they were taken by Larray during the Great Prairie War 80 years ago. The people of Ata wish to stay a part of Larray, despite the shameful way in which these lands were acquired. Ata village has tried its best to combat the Tikarian forces, but we are a small village of only 500 or so. The rising tensions between the Tikar tribe and Atta village have gotten violent. Just yesterday, a fight broke out in the streets, leaving 5 Atta villagers dead. Please, King Laray, bring us help. If Atta village were to fall, there is no telling how many Orcish cities would fall alongside it. Sincerely, head of Atta village, Magor. June's head felt light after reading this. He fell to his bed, clenching the letter in his hand. He looked up towards Kari. Now he was the one who couldn't keep calm. He began to sweat. He had been king for 7 years up until this point, and had never had to use military force against another political entity. June knew how much his father had struggled with the Orcish tribes, but things seemed to calm down after his death. His body began to shake. He couldn't possibly begin to construct even a single idea of how to solve this issue. Kari sits down next to the king. She places her hand on his. King Laray looks towards her. June, she says. Kari's one word was powerful. June, the king's real name, only reserved for those incredibly close to him. This one word was her way of giving June her support. Although the words were not said, June could tell that she was trying to tell him that he did not have to make this decision on his own. June looked Kari in the eyes. He then leaned in and gave her a hug. June felt safe in her arms. Kari was the older sister he'd ever had. 13 years ago, when June was only 7, they had met. Kari was a servant in training. June was the prince of the kingdom of Laray. The 16-year-old Kari was made a part of a servant squad made to look after and protect the young prince. Initially, they didn't get along. 9 years of age difference is a pretty big hurdle to overcome. She was still young, though. The only of June's servants young enough to play games with the energetic young prince. Kari became June's best friend. She was much more than just a friend to June. She was an ally against all the adults of the kingdom. Together, Kari and June got into a lot of trouble, though it was supposedly always Kari's fault. Once June got to the right age, he began asking Kari's advice for getting with the nice girls of the kingdom. Although Kari's advice was terrible, June did get something out of it by doing the opposite. Kari was always there for June, no matter what had happened. From heartbreak to the death of his father, and even now, she was there. June released Kari from the hug. He thought for a moment. I need some advisors. Can you gather all of the best guildmasters from around the kingdom and bring them here to the capital? I will hold a meeting 1 week from now, he says. Yes, I can, she says, getting up. I'll get started immediately. Kari then leaves. June lays back on his bed. What will happen now, father? He thinks to himself.